just while we're getting it set up, thank you very much for having me. I think this is a wonderful idea for a conference, and I'm very excited to be here and join. It's a very eclectic panel, in a sense, but as always with these sorts of things, I feel like there are some interesting overlaps or points of syncretism or something. So hopefully it won't be the traumatic kind, but I don't know if this is working. Yeah, basically. Okay, thank you. So yeah, it's a completely different topic, or seems to be a completely different topic, but I am coming at this not from the 21st century, but from the point of view of the kind of interesting or contested kind of space of the 1930s in Japanese cinema. So I'll just give you a little example here. This is from the movie that I'll be giving as a kind of case study. And this music is also from this movie, even though it's a 1935 movie about an 1867 event. It's using Bolero, which is a really famous song from, I think it's like 1927 or 28 or something like that. So there's a kind of, I don't know, there's something interesting going on there, which is part and parcel of the kind of argument. I'll be making one basic argument, and the music will end soon, don't worry, which is this sort of hybridity, if that's the best word, was really popular in the 1930s, or seems to have been really popular in the 1930s. This sort of playful intertextuality, including oral intertextuality, was really popular. And it seems like we today don't really like it when films verge on kind of silent technique. They sort of skip over into a different mode. But it seems to be the case that in the mid-1930s, audiences, which after all were just becoming accustomed to the idea of sync sound, were totally okay with people sort of bouncing back and forth between silent and sync sound, talky kind of techniques. And we'll look at some examples from this movie. This is Enoken no Kondo Isami. Kondo Isami is a famous Japanese patriot, or maybe like an anti-patriot, I don't know. So it's a strange film, sort of mocking some of the major heroes of the Japanese Bakumatsu period, this 1850s and 60s period. And right from the beginning, this is just a little ad from one of the film journals at the time, but right from the beginning, you could tell that there's a kind of tongue-in-cheek evocation of visual evocation of kind of current trends in Japanese society. This is during the kind of on-again, off-again war in Manchuria, and like just a year and a half or so before total war with China. So you can see these kind of like propagandistic posters in Japan in the 1930s. But then it's sort of like popping up in the movie, which is sort of cute and interesting. But at the same time, well, and I have one more example just as a kind of still image, that Gandhi was really famous in 1935, of course, and he just sort of pops up in this movie. And I think that's just another cute little joke. I don't recall him ever saying anything, or maybe I might be misremembering, but so there's a kind of visual playfulness in the movie, which is very interesting. But it gets into even more kind of, I don't know, unexplored territory with its soundscape, because the soundscape is just all over the place, and it of course has long periods of sync sound, but and it's considered a full talkie, but it's really not. Quite a large proportion, maybe like 15% of the movie is, well, I'll say at least 10% of the movie is shot silently, or at least if there was a sync sound recording, it was completely jettisoned and replaced by a combination of sound effects and various other interesting things. So anyway, I just thought it would be nice to show a couple of examples, so I hope this will work. I don't know if it's gonna, oh good, okay. This is a nice little sound bridge. This is the scene of Sakamoto Ryoma's death, actually, also played by Enomoto Kenichi. And this is... Again, another kind of little joke. He says, "What time is it?" Because he fell asleep. This actor playing both roles in the other role. and the radio answers him by saying, well, in Manchuria, it's this or that time, which is really silly and kind of interesting. But it's interesting how this, the concept of sort of like playful or parodic elements has such a kind of grounding in the soundtrack, or not the soundtrack, but the soundscape of the movie. So you don't have to read this, but this is just an example from another scene, which I think we should see a little bit of. So let me just show you a little bit of this, as this also involves a film. I mean, 1935 is like right at the exact midpoint of the transition to sync sound in Japan. So at that point, audiences are really not yet used to the concept, at least in the Japanese cinema context, of sync sound. So the film is kind of like a pioneering film by PCL, one of the studios that's most heavily invested from the beginning in sound cinema. But it has this kind of creative, nonsensical attitude to it, which is very interesting. So let me just show you a little bit of this. We can't watch the whole thing because it's like 3 minutes long, but this is Enomoto Enoken as Kondo eavesdropping, or like kind of accidentally overhearing the revolutionaries, his enemies, in the very next room. And that's Sakamoto Ryoma, also played by Enoken. So there's a kind of visual joke that we see the two characters sequentially through the magic of editing, but we also overhear, and each character is sort of like overhearing the other. Kondo's ready to charge in and attack the revolutionaries because he hears them, and then in this kind of serious moment, seemingly serious moment, as you see here, Enomoto, Sakamoto Ryoma, is going to sing a song, but the song he sings is like a really popular song from 1935, of course. And it's in English. Parts of it are in English, so that's sort of interesting. We don't have to listen to it, but in the other room, the other character played by Enoken is like, "Oh, this is terrible." He can't stand the sound of it. This is interesting, like pointing out the difficulties with people appreciating this within, like in the movie, diegetic use of abrasive sound. Enomoto's like not famous as a singer really, because his voice is really not good. So that's interesting that we have that kind of, I don't know. It's like orally intertextual, which is really interesting. But there's a lot of other jokes and audio visual gags. They seem to be visual gags. But in fact, and maybe I should skip part of this because I don't know how to skip. Maybe I can't do it in the presentation mode, but okay, I guess we just have to watch the beginning then. You see, this is Sakamoto sort of like observing Katsura Kogoro off by the riverbank, and knows that they're talking, so he puts the telescope to his ear, and that's kind of a little haha moment. And this combination of visual and oral gags is very interesting. I had really thought of, and we don't have to listen to the song. The song is not good, but this use of diegetic sound effects, if that's the right way of putting it, is really kind of fascinating. And before this point, there really wasn't much, as far as I can tell. Even at PCL, there wasn't that much of this kind of experimental or playful use of sound effects. But also after this point, there isn't all that much. So it's like a weird moment where the filmmakers, in particular director Yamamoto Kajiro, just seems really into this kind of experimentation. So it's great for us because we get to see this and listen to this strange experimental film. But it should be also clear in this clip, I think, you can sort of hear the sound effects almost overpowering the diegetic sound. And they're not realistic, of course, but they become part of the diegesis doubly, because some of the characters sort of react like, what are you doing? So that there's that kind of interesting reaction to a sound effect that, of course, the characters can't really hear because it hasn't been added to the movie yet, but they're reacting to it as though they can hear it. And that's something that one doesn't often see, this kind of like on the surface drawing attention to the unreality of sound is interesting. Well, I wish I could skip part of this because it's maybe too long, but oh, maybe I can. How do I do it? Well, I guess I can't really skip, but you can see this kind of, oh, maybe this is a better one. Yeah, okay, this is better. Because this part actually, after a certain point, is shot without the sync sound, or the kind of like synchronous recording at all. After this point, he runs over to the well, and then and that's the clip that was in the title screen of this presentation. I just made a GIF on it. But, is it a serious battle? Is it meant to be serious? I mean, it's obviously a comedy. It doesn't seem very serious to me. And here in this moment, he falls in the well. There's a lot of sound effects. Falls in the well. And after this point, there's basically no more thing around here. I think they switched to no atmospheric, no ambient sound at all, which is interesting. Ridiculous, and it would be ridiculous without the sound, but it's definitely like driven by the sound in a way, which is why I thought it was great to show just the visual in the title screen. But we can't talk about this film without talking about the most famous sequence from it, which is the bolero sequence towards the end. This is when the revolutionaries are about to be caught, and the kind of Shinsengumi character, I guess it was 1864 incident actually, because it's the Ikedeya attack that they're kind of building up to here. Kondo is going to storm in and sort of like kill all the revolutionaries, basically. But just prior to that, they're sort of getting ready their, equipment or whatever it is that they're doing, and they're basically just having a party. So we get this fascinating sequence. There's also a little bit of a sound bridge there, which is interesting. Starts out with this, speaking of like the kind of, I shouldn't say hybridity because you said you didn't want to use hybridity, but some kind of like interesting switch in instruments. Starts out with these kind of Japanese instruments, and then now it's just clarinets and kind of other things that are more familiar from the bolero. And this is all shot without any ambient sound, so like essentially shot silently. But it's shot in such a way that the characters are timing their performances to the music, which they can't hear, since it's not really playing. And yet we see this as viewers in this kind of like additional layer of the soundtrack, or the soundscape, which is really interesting. Watch this whole thing. It goes on for a while. The movie's only about 75 minutes long or so, or maybe 80 minutes. I don't remember exactly, but a long sequence towards the end, which is just, it's not really advancing the story much, but this, we don't have to watch the end, but it ends in a very interesting way. The characters knock, and the knocking of the like hands on the door, which we can't hear because it's not recorded in the kind of diegetic sound, like the sound is inaudible, but we hear it thanks to the addition of the sound effects, which is really interesting. And at the end, there's a kind of strange fluidity, or we would say, I guess today, strange fluidity, as the film just sort of bounces back and forth between sync sound and non-sync sound, or sound and silent sequences. But of course, it doesn't feel silent to us because we have like the sound effects and the music, the non-diegetic music sort of filling it out. But is it non-diegetic? Because the characters are dancing to it at the end. So then what is this? Can we make the kind of clean break between extra diegetic elements that are added by the filmmakers to enhance the experience for the viewers? And the kind of existing sound or conceptual sound for the performers. So this is a really interesting movie in that sense. This whole sequence is basically shot, best word, non-diegetically, or I don't know. It feels sort of diegetic though, because the characters start dancing to this music, which must have been added later. We don't hear any kind of typical sound effects or, sword clashing, kind of chambara. At the kind of synthesis of diegetic music. I don't know. What's the best word? Yes, I mean, and it seems to have been quite a popular movie. It's impossible to prove how much of the film's success came from its playful soundscape, but I think some of it must be from it. The creative kind of death rattles here. I go on too long. This clip is worth watching in its entirety, I think, because it's such a weird and interesting moment. And that's the moment that it breaks back into sync sounds, and there's some kind of like Corral, or like this kind of shouting among the characters. We now again hear the kind of ambient noises of them running around, their feet on the tatami and all that. But then it goes back later again into kind of silent sequence. So another silent sequence. This one with the I guess we could say more like traditional chambara music. But nice moment there where he says probably mate or something like that, but we don't hear it. We don't have to hear it. It's just part of the kind of, well, maybe we do hear it. I guess we make the sound ourselves or something, but it's not recorded for us. That part is added. So he said, konoyaro or something like that. But that seems to have been kind of ADR, essentially, which is interesting. That he's not facing the camera at that point, so we don't know that he said anything. Maybe that's why they had to add that sound in. But that's the only example of diegetic sound. Explicitly diegetic sound. Sound that was recorded as the characters made it, or seemingly as the characters made it. So I guess in the end, this movie, this Enoken Plays Kondo Isami, this kind of strange and experimental, very fluid kind of film, as it wrestles with or plays with the concept of a kind of stable soundscape, just gives the kind of maximum potential of these sorts of combinations, which we never see today. Like well, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but it's very rare to see any kind of like non-sync sound sequence today. And it's certainly rare for films to bounce back and forth as they did, and as this one in particular did in 1935. So I guess that's not much of a conclusion, but I just think it's an interesting film, and it's something that people probably don't really consider. Maybe this is me being too Hegelian or something, but I feel like we normally experience progress in the world of cinema as a kind of from inferior to superior kind of improvement or something, that it's less realistic to have these sorts of elements because they're not recorded at the moment or whatever. And yeah, maybe. But then again, this film is really fun and interesting to watch. So maybe there's something to be said for this kind of hybridity rather than the kind of arrow of progress. So I guess that's what I will say. And just as I think Enoken gets the last word, especially because it happens to be in English in this moment. So I'll just let him have the final word. And that's how Sakamoto Ryoma died. So anyway, thank you very much and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much and for this wonderful presentation. I didn't know about this movie, but it's definitely a masterpiece. We don't have much time, but maybe one or two questions. Yeah, Marin?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting about that. For me, this kind of blurriness between non-diegetic sound and diegetic sound is very much also about like breaking the fourth wall. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, and I thought I was wondering if there were like more explicit passage in the film when they actually break the fourth wall, like in a very explicit way.
Not in the classical sense of like turning to the camera and being like, hey, you know, nothing like that as far as I can recall. But the closest thing to that would be the moments when the characters, in my opinion, when the characters are reacting to the music that hasn't been added yet and are like sort of performing, dancing or listening to the kind of beating of the drums as though it were a knock on the door and then reacting to that. That's not exactly the kind of classic breaking the fourth wall, but it does seem similar. Yeah, and I don't know, this whole series of Enoken films, Enoken was a famous vaudevillian player, so he has this kind of like, you know, breaking of the fourth wall mentality, I think. And it's in a lot of his films, so it's not just this one. But this is in my opinion, this is the most interesting one from a kind of sound effects or soundscape point of view. But I bet you can find examples of Enoken just turning to the camera and being like, what do you think about this, home audience or whatever? So, yeah, I don't remember. Has anyone seen this movie? Probably not. This is pretty hard to find. But if you do happen to watch it, let me know if you find a moment, because I've only seen it in its entirety once. And I don't know that I was necessarily looking for that. So, yeah, sorry.
I was thinking also, sorry, maybe another. No, I was thinking also how is there a relation with like, when you speak about diegetic and non-diegetic sound, it's really related also to naturalistic tradition of theater, to European theater. But how can you, in a Japanese context, it's totally different. Of course, there's totally another tradition of performing arts, and how can this film can be related to this tradition in more, kind of a question.
It's a great question for which I don't really have a good answer. So yeah, we need somebody else to watch the movie and sort of figure out what those connections might be, I think. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. The film made me think about a cartoon, and I was wondering what is the use of sound in cartoons or animation movies in Japan at the same time?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, in the edited volume that Iris and I are working on, there's one chapter is about the use of kind of sound in these sort of early animated works. But yeah, I'm not actually sure. The earliest animated work that I can think of is from the 1910s, so there's no sound at all. But sound exists as a concept, of course. So characters react to things that they hear, as you might expect from live action cinema too. If you're talking about the 1940s, it's easier because there's some surviving examples of like Momotaro. And there's a lot of, I mean, like it's basically just a kind of creepy propaganda musical, you know, where characters learn the Japanese alphabet, if that's the right word, by just performing it, and singing along with the characters in the movie. So there's a lot of that, but there isn't as much of this kind of playful sound effect in that material, which is interesting because I agree, this is cartoonish in a way, but it's more cartoonish than cartoons, so I don't know why they went so all out on this movie, but they definitely did. We may be out of time.
The question about
Sure.
this cartoonish thing, I would like to know if you know if manzai or rakugo or this kind of comical traditional Japanese, you say, etc., you have this kind of sound effect, or is it like he said a cartoonish thing, westernized thing?
Well, I think there's some incorporation of sound effects, or not sound effects, but like kind of signals, if that's the right word. Like a kind of hitting of the block or something, maybe at the moment of a joke or something like that. I don't know much about the manzai case, but there's some incorporation of manzai in wartime Japanese cinema, which is really interesting. So they sort of pop up in these movies sometimes, and it's like, what are these two doing there? They're just famous manzai performers from the 1940s. Why are they in this weird movie supposed to be about the 1860s? But yeah, I wouldn't say it's as pronounced, the sound effects, or the use of aural signals as it is in this movie, which is just filled with these weird sound effects.
I was also thinking about the silent movie era and the benches roles when they add intentionally during the projection sound effects. Yeah. And maybe there's a connection between performing arts and movies and film.
Well, there's so much overlap. Yeah, this kind of this unrepeatable quality to the live performance. If it's a benchy and the benchy's doing a good job, you can get this additional layer. And if they're not doing a good job, or if they're drunk or whatever, which often happened, then they're maybe you don't get that. So yeah, interesting. This is like, it wouldn't be in 1935. It's not impossible to have a benchy perform, even though it's a kind of talkie. You could still have benchy like sort of adding other things in. But I feel like this is the final stage, because at this point, with the movie like this, there's really no room for the benchy to like improvise much, because the film is full of all this kind of sound effect richness that, what is left for the benchy to do, really, So that, yeah, it's really interesting. You could see like the use of intertitles or something like that in the early 1930s as an attempt to kind of, make the benchy obsolete. But this movie is going even one step further and saying there's nothing left. Not even sound effects are left for the benchy to do. So, yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to be a benchy in 1935, I guess. But yeah.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you very much